of today's webinar at utah-apa.org/webcast archive, and that will be up by Monday. So thank you all for taking the time to join us, and we're very excited to have you as part of our webcast series. Today's webcast, called Wasted Love, The Irresistible Benefits of Regional Food Waste Planning, is hosted by myself, Jennifer Evans-Cowley. I'm a faculty member at Ohio State University, and by Angel Arroyo-Rodriguez, who is a solid waste organics planner with the Ohio EPA. And so we're very excited to be able to talk to you some about regional food waste planning. But before we get started, we wanted to go ahead and ask you a couple of questions to find out how familiar you are with what food waste planning is. So the first question that we want to ask you is, do you know what food waste planning is? And so I'm going to let folks answer and say yes, no, I think I have some idea, I have no idea what food waste planning is. And so we're going to see what you all think. We'll give folks a few seconds to respond. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in just about 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to share the results. So what you see is that 10% of you know what food waste planning is, so that's great. And 58% of you say, I think I have some idea, 22% no, 10% I have no idea. And part of why Angel and I wanted to undertake this webcast is that we thought it's an emerging area of planning that a lot of people don't know a whole lot about, so we thought it would be a great thing to help introduce the broader planner community to this topic. So we have one more poll question that we want to ask you. And so we want to know how many of you are involved in food waste planning as part of your professional planning activities. So we'll give folks some seconds to respond. Yes, no, not sure if you're involved in this. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in just about 2 seconds. Okay, so 89% of you said that you're not involved in food waste planning. For the 9% of you that are involved in food waste planning, we'd love to hear a little bit about what you are doing related to food waste planning. So if you want to type a very concise example into the questions box, we'd be happy to share those later in the webcast, because we'd certainly like to learn from the experience of other planners across the country. Okay, so what we're going to do at this point is we're going to go ahead and move on and start the presentation itself. I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Angel, who will be giving you an overview of what food waste planning is, how it relates to the types of planning that you may be engaged in, and then we'll turn it back over to me, and I'll give you a specific case study of how we've been working to implement regional food waste planning in a region. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Angel. Angel, are you ready?
Hello. Let me show my screen. I'll be ready in a second.
Great, thank you. So while we're waiting, we will see. So Sullivan says that he writes about what various communities are doing in terms of managing their food waste. So that's great to hear about that. And then Brian says that they're working with schools to prevent waste in our county, in businesses and at homes.
Perfect.
Yeah, so we've got some folks that are actively involved.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thank everyone for joining in today. Just like what Brian and the other planner mentioned, I suspect that many of you are encountering an increased interest by companies, community organizations, residents for managing their food waste. And this increased awareness on sustainability and sustainability practices pretty much have brought this up to the forefront. And so far, it has been environmental planners specializing in solid waste management, planning, or environmental health practitioners, the ones trying to figure out how to handle food waste, But we are realizing that is not enough, that food waste management requires more comprehensive planning. In addition to environmental concerns, well, food waste has social and economic implications. So my goal in the next few minutes is to make a case for the importance of planning on how to manage food waste in the food system and how this effort requires the involvement of other areas of planning. So what is the food system? The food system is a sequence of activities tying together food production, processing, distribution, access, consumption, waste, and their associated regulatory institutions and activities. And as central as food waste is for society and as complex as the food system can be, it is interesting that until recently there has been a lack of planning for food systems as part of the development of regions and urban areas. The study of over 20 comprehensive plans published in 2000 found that comprehensive plans rarely address planning for food. And in addition, none of these plans were addressing planning for food waste management. The authors of the study specifically searched for mention of composting, which will be expected to be popular food waste activity at community gardens at the least. Let me move. Okay, let me try to move to the next slide. Okay, yeah. Food systems planning has been more focused on the aspects of production, equitable distribution, and the impact of access and food quality on public health, while solid waste management planning is focused on addressing the environmental effects of food waste as a component of the solid waste stream. But this is expected, as in most states, solid waste planning is mandated for the purpose of ensuring the safe disposal of waste. But with food waste planning, what we are seeking is to integrate both approaches, where planning for food considers the reduction and management of food waste throughout the system as a way to increase efficiency, and also while working in collaboration with solid waste planning efforts to ensure the availability of sustainable management practices for the food waste. And the hope that a successful integration of these two planning efforts should result in less waste, which leads to improved environmental health, and solid waste will be considered a resource that can increase food production instead of being considered a waste. And to accomplish this, we have to start forming synergies among food waste generators and potential users. So exactly what are we talking when we're talking about food waste? The US EPA defines food waste as any food substance, raw or cooked, which is discarded or intended or required to be discarded. Food waste are the organic residues generated by the handling, storage, sale, preparation, cooking, and serving of food. So food waste may be generated as trimmings prior to cooking or processing. Also could be just fine edible food that someone just doesn't want anymore. Or it might be food items that passed the expiration date and by law are required to be discarded. And this definition from US EPA identifies steps that might produce the food waste, except the actual production step or farming. And it's not that it's not important, but farm waste are usually kept at the farm and not sent to landfills. So we can say that there is not a pressing need for solid waste planners to plan for a waste stream that practically is not there or not in significant amounts. It's already being handled. Okay. Now also, US EPA further differentiates between pre-consumer and post-consumer food waste. This is because the way that it is generated and collected has many implications on how it can either be collected, and this will affect the quality of the waste. And by quality, I mean the level of contamination with non-compostables, which ultimately will determine how it could be handled and what can be done with it. I think that it helps to grasp the complexity of the system if we are familiar with the difference of scales they could have. And I like to think in terms of three scales. One scale is a conventional system where food is produced and processed in large scale The large areas are dedicated to few crops. Food is transported long distances to reach the consumer, etc. Then we have the community and regional system, which kind of emphasizes a smaller scale with a community and regional approach, but with consideration and or integration into the conventional system. And more recently, we hear a lot of people starting to talk about the local system, consuming local foods and what we call the locavores. Certainly local is a relative term, and it might mean something different to a specific community or a region or to a company or a regulatory agency. But all food systems have the same activities and process, but the components of what can happen in each activity or process can vary. So let's take a look a little closer at the components of a community food system. This diagram is very close to the diagrams in the Planner's Guide to Community and Regional Food Planning. I just took the liberty to edit it for space, but the information is the same. In terms of production, we have a role for both conventional agriculture and for local farms. Community-supported agriculture and community gardens are also included. So food is produced at a variety of scales. Although we might be able to grow a lot of crops at a farm and an urban farm, it might not be possible to grow livestock, so conventional agriculture might have a role for that still. And again, the scales are relative. Food processing and distribution is in a similar situation. We have conventional larger scale and also more local scales or regional scales, and both are important here. And for consumption, we have here residents, workers, and visitors. And I will say that these should include animals, because some of the food that is grown is actually eventually used for livestock feeds and even for pet food. So when we get to disposal, we have composting and vermiculture, which are very popular and effective methods. Also recycling. This mainly refers to using the organic material, the food waste, for biogas recovery, and also to make biofuels from spent cooking oil. And last, we have conventional disposal, which is pretty much landfilling. It is important to address the food waste prominently in the food system because this pretty much generated at every single step and process. And according to US EPA estimates, 14% of the commercial and residential waste stream is food waste. And this percentage has been pretty much the same for the last 6 years at least. And it is estimated that in the United States, about $1 billion are spent each year on disposal of food scraps, or food waste. A study from Arizona estimates that 40 to 50% of the food that is ready for harvest never gets eaten. Some of this food was never harvested, some was lost during transport, during processing, and some was just bought but not eaten. The same study estimates that a household throws away an average of 470 pounds of food waste per year, which translates to about $600 per household. And another study by USDA Economic Research Service found that estimated that about 96 billion pounds of food, or 20% of the edible food that is actually available for human consumption, was lost at the retail level, at the food service, and at the consumer level or household. And if even just 5% of those 96 billion pounds were recovered, that quantity could feed 4 million people for a day. That is based on an average of 3 pounds of food per person per day. So how do we manage food waste? A couple of years back, US EPA and USDA published a hierarchy of the preferred methods and options for managing food waste. And it starts with the reduction, such as buying the amounts needed. That's very special, useful for restaurants and service industry. And even removing trays from cafeterias, so people serve themselves just what they can carry. That has proven to be a big way to incentivize reduction. The next step is recovery of edible food for human consumption, and this is mainly done through donations. But this can also include meal sharing among neighbors. And next is using food for making animal feed. Next in the hierarchy is industrial uses, which includes the extraction of oils for manufacturing of other products, and also include anaerobic digestion with biogas recovery. That's for renewable energy.
Hey, Angel, can you speak up a little bit? A few people are having a hard time hearing. Thank you.
Then this is followed by composting, which produces compost that can be used to improve soils. And last is landfilling and incineration without energy recovery as the last preferable option. Is that better, Jennifer?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now, in order to integrate food waste management into the food system, you need to identify three main things. First, which activities of the food system are predominant in your area, which may be generating the majority of the waste. Second, we need to know what can we do with the waste. Where do we take it? What is the local infrastructure for managing the waste? This means identifying the food banks, the composting facilities, anaerobic digesters, etc. And third, we need to know how we are going to get this food waste to these facilities. We need to know how many hauling companies service the area and if they will just haul food waste by itself. Also, we need to know the distances from the generator of the food waste to the facility and see if this meets the economies of scale. And certainly, our food waste is important, but right now there's not a single state that has all the infrastructure needed to handle all their food waste that is being generated. Other than landfills, but still many places don't even have landfills, nor do they want one. And at this time, it's kind of pretty much a chicken and the egg thing. So we need facilities to handle it, but the facilities want to ensure that they will get the food waste from the generators. And this is one aspect where we planners can be very helpful, promoting that synergy. So you may want to start with the most viable generator, and we know from studies that the majority of food waste is generated at the retail, food service, and consumer level, but we must decide who within those categories are generating the largest amounts and who will be more likely to do it, or will be easier to get started. Now I want to use this map that you're seeing in your screen. It's a map that we have for Ohio. I just want to show you this example. This shows the coverage at certain distances around composting facilities that accept food waste. And this map shows the radius of 10 miles. As you can see, what are the areas that are covered. At 50 miles, which is another layer that we will have, most of the state is covered. We went up to 50 miles because haulers told us that that seems to be the break, the maximum distance where the transportation of the food waste is no longer economically viable. But still, even if you have complete coverage of your area at a 50-mile radius, more facilities will be needed. And it's very important to consider the generation density. And there are other considerations that we must have in mind, and here are a few examples. Who generates the food waste will determine what kind of food waste is produced, and that in turn will determine how to best handle it. And for example, this food waste here is from a grocery store. And grocery stores are more likely to mix wheat wax cardboard, which cannot be recycled, but is just perfect for composting. And another consideration is how this food waste can be collected and stored in a commercial building, and the frequency of pickup from the hauler. So leak-proof containers might be needed, and these new types of containers will also require a whole new kind of truck for managing it. Certainly this truck looks very different than your regular trash dump truck. Okay. Also, the amount generated will determine the management options. So in the picture here in the lower left corner, we can see the inventiveness of the staff at the Finley Market in downtown Cincinnati, where they compost in these green vessels in the back that they have a 3 cubic yard capacity. And they compost right there in the loading area of the market. And also an office building in a busy downtown, like San Francisco, might not have that much space or need for larger containers. So the issue becomes one of providing space for them. It becomes a space design issue. And same goes for residential. You know, are we okay with residents keeping all their bins outside? Or are we going to require them to keep it in the garage? And so will this garage have enough space for them to keep all these containers? To ensure that food waste recovery and diversion happens, we must have the proper regulatory framework. For donations, this is somewhat easier thanks to the Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act of 1996, which creates a uniform minimum level of protection from liability for donors and gleaners. But you might be aware that some states also have their own food donation Good Samaritan laws. Those mostly predate this act, so it's important to review them and make sure that there are not unintended conflicts. But also very important is that some of these state laws may provide protections for donors and gleaners above and beyond that guaranteed by the federal statute. Another consideration is state and local health department regulations that applies to food safety and food inspections, which can dictate which foods, prepared foods can be donated. Also, we need to be aware what are the requirements for permitting for composting and anaerobic digestion facilities in the state. And these facilities are typically regulated under solid waste regulations. And solid waste regulations vary from state to state. Land application of some food items, such as non-processed fruits and vegetables, is not unusual, and it might be regulated as a solid waste disposal. But depending on the location, the actual location where this is happening, there might be requirements under the Clean Water Act. And very important too, we need to understand if there's any differences in permitting of these activities between agricultural and non-agricultural locations. A very important and increasingly becoming a more prominent issue is how the current zoning ordinances accommodate the siting of these facilities and how they allow composting and other similar methods at community gardens. So it's important to clarify to citizens that the difference between the siting criteria and setback requirements in environmental permitting regulations and what are zoning use categories and design code standards. Measuring the progress on food diversion has proven to be tricky as data collection methods are not standardized. And so reporting and tracking requirements vary, but we still have some options to get decent estimates. Tracking recovery of food donations is probably the most accurate data, as all food banks track how much food is received. And this makes sense, because this is an essential part of how they operate. The donors want to know how much was donated for tax deduction purposes. But food banks mainly act as distribution centers and are easy to locate because there are less of them. And they're also likely to be part of Feeding America or Second Harvest, which makes them also easier to locate. However, you need to be aware that donations through food rescue organizations, such as when a restaurant or caterer have a few trays and calls a church group that runs a soup kitchen, they might be recorded. Food rescue organizations and soup kitchens might take more legwork to find, but most of the food banks actually have a listing of those. And on the other hand, some donors themselves keep track of donations, so restaurant and grocery associations are good contacts. And something else to be aware is that not all food that is donated ends up being distributed, so food banks can provide information on their own food waste generation. And at a recent meeting that we had here in Ohio, the Columbus and Cleveland food banks indicated that this is in fact a serious problem that takes away funds that could be used for obtaining foods that they must buy, such as meat. And as of now, there is no formal report published on food waste generations by food banks. So food waste diversion on the environmental side is most commonly tracked as the amount delivered at composting facilities and more recently at anaerobic digesters or biogas facilities. So you need to be aware that the accuracy of the measurements will depend if the facilities has a weight scale or if they're doing visual estimates. It also will vary if the food waste is collected by itself or commingled with other composters, such as papers and cardboard, such as in the samples of the grocery stores. Well, we might have 10 tons of waste coming in, but actually 2 will be food waste. However, there's not much of a way to differentiate that. Yeah. This information, the incoming waste data should be available on an annual basis and should be easy to see an increase or decline in the amount. Disposal and recycling facilities are typically required by regulations to track incoming waste, so that data should be available. Another way to measure progress is to track reduction of solid waste landfills. And although this data is available yearly, it is not broken down by type of waste. So on a yearly basis, there might not be a noticeable difference, but over a period of time, it might be possible to make a correlation. The national trend since 2008 has been a decline in solid waste sent to landfills. Mostly, we thought that the economy downturn was a factor as people were buying less, so generating less waste. But another significant factor is the reduction in packaging by manufacturing as a way to reduce production cost. So if this trend continues, especially the reduction in packaging and increased recycling, we can expect that in the future it will be easier to notice an effect of food waste diversion in total waste generation. I can think of any other picture that summarizes and illustrates the importance of food waste planning as well as this one. So now I will pass this back to Jennifer, who will discuss the case study we were involved in the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Angel. All right, so I'm going to be giving you a case study of what we've been working on together. So Angel and I have been partnering on a project on the Mississippi Gulf Coast as part of the Plan for Opportunity. The Plan for Opportunity is a HUD regional sustainability planning effort on the Mississippi Gulf Coast that has been funded by one of the HUD regional sustainability grants. So I'm a professor here in city planning at Ohio State, and I serve as a major partner supporting the food, water, and housing elements of this Plan for Opportunity. And I'll just give you a brief introduction to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. This region has 3 counties with a total population of about 375,000. This region is the 3rd largest gaming destination in the country behind Las Vegas and Atlantic City, and combined with its beautiful white beaches, it's a significant regional tourism destination. It's a major employment center for shipbuilding, military, marine science, and chemical processing, and many of you know that Hurricane Katrina decimated the Mississippi Gulf Coast, destroying more than 50,000 housing units 6 years ago. And so the recovery over that last 6 years has been significant, but has resulted in significant changes in the development patterns and has resulted in significant changes in the economy. And while these have served as challenges, the region is resilient and is really passionate about making sure that they have a more sustainable future. And so all of that led to a decision to focus on regional planning and this Plan for Opportunity. Now, there are 8 elements of this sustainability plan, including everything from climate change and resiliency to air, water, and food. And so I'm going to be focusing on the food element specifically, known as Savor the Coast. And so myself, Angel, and then graduate students at Ohio State worked with a food systems subcommittee on the Mississippi Gulf Coast to prepare this element of the plan. And from our perspective, a healthy region is one that embraces both its human and environmental health. And so one component of Savor the Coast is focused on food waste diversion. And so I'm going to go into more detail about food waste planning and how we applied it in this particular situation. So HUD, as part of these regional sustainability planning grants, requires that you be thinking about their HUD livability principles. And so we use those livability principles to think about how they relate to food. So providing more transportation choice. In this case, it would include residents' access to food, but also transportation access to food waste diversion sites. In promoting equitable and affordable housing, this includes considering how accessible food sources are to affordable housing and the ability of our residents to gain access to that food. Enhancing economic competitiveness. This meant examining how food waste diversion can support economic competitiveness. And we kind of go on from there. So we just wanted to think in everything that we were doing, how are we going to support the livability and sustainability of this region by focusing on food waste? So what we did is we started in January through September of 2011 in focusing on understanding the challenges that were facing the Mississippi Gulf Coast food system, as well as giving careful consideration to potential solutions. And all of the materials that we've developed as part of this Plan for Opportunity are available at gulfcoastplan.org. And so if you're interested, you can go to gulfcoastplan.org for more information. So the region decided that food was an appropriate starting point in the sustainability planning effort because it's a non-negotiable need that impacts all of us. And it was going to be the least controversial element of the plan, and it's easy to get people talking about food in general. So in order to undertake this work, the subcommittee wanted to understand the food system as a whole and to understand the complicated system that feeds the Mississippi Gulf Coast. So we did this comprehensive food system assessment, which is an approximately 100-page long document that provides a strong factual basis to support decision-making and recommendations. So this poster just highlights some of the things that we were thinking about, and I'll focus a little bit on the food waste portions of that. So part of what we wanted to study was not just the 3 coastal counties, but the greater 100-mile food shed that included the waters of the Gulf Coast, where the coast seafood comes from, and the farms in the area north of the coast, which might be recipients for these diverted food wastes. So food security is one important issue, and that's something that Angel hit on earlier. So every month you hear what the region's unemployment rate is, and that figure is based on a survey of residents. As part of this same survey, people are asked about whether they did not have enough to eat or were worried that they would not have enough to eat. And 17% of Mississippi's coastal households indicated that they had experienced hunger or worry about hunger. And that's about 3% higher than the national average. So this points to the importance of considering emergency food supplies. And in that EPA food waste reduction pyramid that Angel showed earlier, it focuses first on source reduction. And so that includes everything from packaging to the overproduction of food. But the second part of that pyramid is diverting food to the hungry. And EPA estimates that if just 5% of edible discarded foods were recovered, an additional 4 million Americans could eat each day, resulting in improved food security among the region's residents. Now, food waste generators in the food shed included food manufacturers, institutions, agriculture, businesses, and residential users. For example, shrimp processing alone generates more than 50 million pounds of organic waste on the Mississippi coast. And when we started, food waste was minimally composted through a few small-scale initiatives, but most of the food waste was being sent to landfills, including the seafood waste and food waste from large institutional users. Now, there are 2 waste facilities on the Mississippi coast that account for more than 20% of the total land application waste applied in Mississippi. And at the time of this study, really there was only one new initiative that was starting to look at food waste diversion, and it was Walmart. So Walmart had just started diverting its food waste at the end of 2010 from its Mississippi Gulf Coast stores. So this just small handful of facts points to a complicated set of problems that the Food Systems Subcommittee needed to address. So the next step in the process was to be able to understand more the story behind the facts. So what was driving food insecurity? What was driving the waste going to landfills versus other types of methods? So we wanted to understand these stories, and so we interviewed a large number of stakeholders. And to understand that, we wound up talking to hundreds and hundreds of people. We talked to more than 600 stakeholders across the region. And what this allowed us to do was to help frame our discussion. So what we did as part of the assessment is that we looked at aquaculture and climate change and waste management and a whole number of topics, and then we went to where food production and food processing and food distribution was actually happening, and then talked to these more than 600 stakeholders throughout the food system, including everybody from producers to consumers to retailers and so on. And as a result of that, the subcommittee created a framework of 4 goals to strengthen the food economy, to foster connections between stakeholders, to support access to healthy food, and to promote environmental health. And food waste intersects with all 4 of these key goals. So we interacted with more than 600 stakeholders across the food system, and when we talked to these stakeholders, we asked them about their role in the food system, the barriers they're facing, and the opportunities for the future. And we heard stories that were moving, inspiring, and compelling, and helped to illustrate how committed the people of the Mississippi Gulf Coast are to the culture of food in their communities. So I picked just a few stories as examples that exemplify these challenges facing the coast and illustrate the way that the Food Systems Subcommittee imagined how to implement sustainability measures that could result in positive momentum forward on food waste reduction. So to start, to understand the needs of the coast's most vulnerable population, we had a focus group with homeless individuals. And one homeless mother described the challenges of her $200 monthly budget to feed a family of 4. And so she said $200 just wasn't enough, especially when she doesn't have anywhere to cook because they live on the streets. And getting to the store is hard. Walmart and the grocery stores are far away, and she doesn't have a way to get there. She usually rides her bike 3 miles to get to the closest Winn-Dixie. She's tried to clip coupons, but the stores won't let you use coupons with your food stamps. So typically she buys a loaf of bread and bologna, but it's so hot on the coast that it goes bad fast and won't last more than a day. She'd like to be able to buy fruits and vegetables at the nearby farmer's market, but they won't accept her EBT card. And on the nights that they have to sleep on the streets, they can't store any food because the raccoons come and steal it away. She said that if she could buy charcoal with her benefits, she could use the grills in the parks to cook meats and vegetables. And when she runs out of money, she and her children go to the soup kitchen for breakfast and lunch while her husband tries to get day labor. That means he can't eat breakfast because he has to be out waiting for potential employers by 5 a.m. And if he gets work, he misses lunch. And the soup kitchens aren't open for dinner, so on some days he has to go without food. So what the subcommittee tried to do was to take these stories and try to imagine 15 years in the future. What solutions would help them in terms of increasing the access to food? So 15 years in the future, the subcommittee imagined that this family is no longer living in poverty and that they now get to volunteer at the community mission where we first met this family. The mission now has a community kitchen with areas to store and prepare food, and the soup kitchen next door now offers dinner service targeted at day laborers. The local food pantries are now able to serve more individuals as a result of the Regional Food Council's matchmaking service that allows local food businesses to post what food is available for pickup by food banks and pantries. And the USDA changed the SNAP program to allow charcoal and other cooking fuels to be purchased with benefits to allow people to maximize their food purchases and prevent waste. And Mississippi changed the administration of its benefits programs to allow them to be redeemed through farmers market managers. With the expansion of access for the coast's most vulnerable residents, everyone would be able to savor the coast. So Mississippi is one of the leading states in terms of broiler production, with poultry farms across the state. Chickens are also a major export, with much of the white meat kept for domestic consumption, while the dark meat is exported through the port of Pascagoula heading to Russia. We wanted to talk to a poultry farmer, and so we reached out to John Logan. And while we expected to meet an ordinary chicken farmer, what we discovered was an extraordinary example of sustainability in practice right there in this food shed. So John Logan spent his career working in the business world, while he always dreamed of bringing back his family's farm in Prentice, which had been abandoned for 17 years. Once he retired, he took up the challenge of putting the farm back into production. John wanted a state-of-the-art operation fitted with innovative technologies and sustainable business practices. And what emerged is Brenton Farms, a poultry producer for Tyson. Brinson is a one-of-a-kind showpiece in poultry production. John designed the buildings on the farm, and with his infectious enthusiasm, John took us around the property describing the remarkable features. One highlight is Brenton Farms' office, and you get this light and airy, trendy office feeling in an urban setting rather than on a farm. The office is made from wood from the trees on the farm, maximizes the use of natural light and ventilation to reduce the amount of HVAC that's required. And the grounds on the farm are immaculate. There was no odor, which one would expect at a poultry farm. And John was able to integrate site design principles that allowed him to actually improve the water quality in the neighboring stream in spite of the introduction of poultry production. But the most interesting part of the farm is the biodigester, which was patented 7 years ago. It processes all of the chicken manure from all of the chicken houses and produces enough energy to meet the on-site needs, and sometimes produces a surplus that John sells back to the grid. Both the liquid and solid byproducts of the biodigester are incorporated into Brinson's new 20-acre composting site. John recently started receiving multiple truckloads of food waste from Walmart each week, and this continuous loop of production, waste, and energy has become a refined model, maximizing efficiency and minimizing the environmental impacts of John's poultry operation. John has received international attention for his sustainable poultry system, and he's also assisted other poultry farms within the state reaching out to install similar technologies. And John thinks that there are probably 100 poultry farms statewide that are operating a similar scale that could integrate these sustainable technologies. Now, one issue that John ran into was Mississippi's composting regulations, which classify an operation such as a landfill to require extensive permitting. And this has made it difficult for John to establish and expand the composting segment of his innovative business model. And he'd like to see that Mississippi establish a regulatory framework that encourages innovative practices such as his. So when we think about 15 years in the future, the subcommittee imagined that John Logan at Brenton Farms was able to expand his composting operations thanks to streamlined compost permitting processes through the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality. And John had established a new composting site closer to the coast, which receives food waste from major retailers and institutions in the area. The Food Waste Task Force, a part of the Regional Food Policy Council, helps to identify food waste generators that can send their waste to John's new compost site instead of the landfill, ultimately resulting in less carbon emissions from the region's solid waste sites. In addition, his biodigester technology was adapted for the regional wastewater treatment facility, which now produces energy from the treatment of the region's sewage and food waste. This expansion of renewable energy projects has been made possible by a renewable energy investment strategy, which has targeted producers and others in the food system to utilize more sustainable energy practices, including solar power for aquaculture and offshore wind power integrated with mariculture projects. John recently sold his farm to a like-minded poultry farmer, we imagine 15 years in the future, who plans to run the farm based on the same sustainability principles. And while retired again, John has still been active, helping many poultry farmers over the last 15 years to install his patented biodigester on their farms, allowing them to more sustainably handle their own poultry waste and to generate enough power on-site to meet most of their needs. As a result of John's effort, Mississippi could claim to have the most sustainably produced chickens in the country, and residents are able to savor the coast's fresh and sustainably produced poultry. Now, currently in Mississippi, they primarily export low-value products while keeping high-value products in the state. And so this is a great opportunity to support local consumption, but serves as a challenge for strengthening the food economy. And most of the food producers and processors in the region have 5 or fewer employees. And so we wanted to talk to food processors, including both large-scale food processors such as in seafood, but also to small-scale food processors. And that's how we met the Hendersons, who own the Lazy Magnolia Brewery. So Leslie and Mark Henderson at Christmas one year decided to try a home brewing kit. Their beer brewing started as a hobby, but with the encouragement from friends and family, the couple decided to build their hobby into a business. And in 2003, the Lazy Magnolia opened as their brewery operation in Kiln, Mississippi. The brewing couple worked hard to create 5 selections of beer that have gained international recognition for their quality, and they're now distributing across Mississippi into 5 other states. Leslie and Mark are committed to using local ingredients in their beers, such as sweet potatoes and grains, and they're also conscious of how they dispose of their byproducts. Spent grains are diverted to a local hog farmer, spent yeast goes to a local cattle farmer, and spent beer is used to water fields and supplement waste treatment plants. So Leslie and Mark would like to expand, but they face barriers. For example, Mississippi's law prohibits the sale and production of beer with an alcohol content exceeding 6%. The Hendersons see this as a missed opportunity. With more flexible laws, Mississippi could have more export of high-value products and allow and encourage other breweries to enter the market. However, the biggest challenge for Lazy Magnolia had been in securing financing to expand their business. They found that it was very difficult as a small business to find that local government agencies and economic development agencies would help them in their job production attempts because they were primarily focused on large-scale production. So they saw that as a important consideration as they tried to grow. So in looking forward to the future, Leslie and Mark's Lazy Magnolia Brewery would have grown steadily over this 15-year period and is now an established and well-respected employer in the region, producing signature brews that reflect the culinary profile of the Mississippi coast. And years ago, thanks to the local food business funding initiative, the Lazy Magnolia was able to obtain a low-interest loan to help pay for the capital equipment needed to expand their brewery. Each year since, they've been able to add employees, and Mark was able to work with the matchmaking task force as part of the Regional Food Council to identify potential partnerships to create innovative new products. They've won several national awards for their blueberry-infused beer sourced from the region's blueberry farms. The local blueberry growers who 15 years ago were having 40% of the blueberries go to waste are now able to divert those blueberries to blueberry juicers who then provide the juice to Lazy Magnolia. The Regional Food Council has also advocated for state policy changes to allow the Lazy Magnolia to produce a wider range of products and to provide in-house tastings to visitors. Their partnership with the Mississippi Hospitality and Restaurant Association and the University of Mississippi's Southern Foodways program allowed them to create a culinary tourism mapping initiative that identifies culinary destinations across the region, resulting in a Mississippi coastal foodway. The brewery now offers daily tours and tastings, making it one of the most popular stops on the Mississippi Coastal Foodway. The growth of the brewery has meant more diverted products going to the region's bakers and to farmers. And thanks to the Lazy Magnolia's continued growth, more and more visitors to the region are able to savor the coast through the taste of its beers. We also wanted to learn from the region's institutions, and that's how we met Doug Smith at Keesler Air Force Base. Doug has been charged with diverting 50% of Keesler's waste. This is the result of a federal mandate that all military bases achieve this goal in the next few years. While Keesler already has a high rate of diversion of cardboard, Doug saw significant opportunity to increase diversion in other areas. For example, 3 dining halls on the base serving thousands of meals a day presented a substantial opportunity to improve recycling and diversion efforts. Doug has instituted biodegradable napkins and paper towels on the base, and other biodegradable products such as plastics are being considered. Doug worked with the dining halls to separate their food scraps, but then he had the problem of where to send them. It turns out that there wasn't anywhere to send these waste products, and he had to send the food scraps to the landfill. Doug explained to us that if there was a food waste hauler that could be identified, they could start diverting their waste immediately. So back in March, we held a food scraps stakeholder meeting to bring together different institutional consumers, waste management agencies, haulers, and food banks to have a conversation about what the region might want to do. And at this meeting, Doug met with Adam from Novaterra, a startup business in Louisiana that was the contractor picking up Walmart's food scraps on the coast. And as a result of their meeting, a month later, the company began picking up food scraps from Keesler at a cost lower than what they were paying already to send this to the landfill. The Keesler Air Force Base is now diverting 26 tons of food scraps a month. And because of the new business, this company is looking at opening a compost facility in Mississippi, bringing new green jobs to the coast. With the new food waste diversion from Walmart and Keesler, more than 1,200 tons of waste will be composted this year instead of sent to the landfill. And according to the U.S. EPA's Waste Reduction Model Calculator, this diversion results in carbon reduction equivalent to taking over 200 cars off the road. And we can expect more reduction to come as the Navy base has started to divert their food scraps as well as a result of the sustainability planning effort. Now, when the Food Systems Subcommittee imagined 15 years in the future, they see a bright future at Keesler. They imagine that the Food Scrap Stakeholder Group ultimately becomes the Food Waste Task Force of the Regional Food Council, and that this task force continues to work to foster partnerships in the food waste sector, maximizing diversion of food waste from the region's landfills. Now, Doug has continued to work toward increasing waste diversion at Keesler and surpass the federal mandate to become the first military base to achieve zero waste recognition. Changes in federal regulations would allow the base to be able to donate its surplus edible food to the region's food banks so that each evening the dining hall coordinator, like many retailers in the area, would be able to log into a surplus food matchmaking website to post an inventory of available surplus food, which the region's food banks and pantries could claim and pick up according to their needs. Used cooking oil would be diverted to fuel that would power the vehicles on the base, and visitors to the annual air show would be able to divert their waste through Keesler's implementation of best practices for public events, such as using compostable utensils and plates. This would allow the air show to become a showcase for Keesler's sustainable practices and a fun educational forum. As an anchor institution and leader in the region, Keesler would set the example for sustainable food waste practices, demonstrating how these practices can be successfully adopted by other bases and institutions along the coast. And Keesler would set the path for military personnel across the region to savor the coast. So this just highlights a few of the solutions that would promote a healthier, more sustainable region. The final set of recommendations, titled Savor the Coast, has been accepted by our Regional Executive Committee, and they're available on the website. Now, I will say that we generated just a tremendous amount of excitement around food waste diversion, and I can happily report that we have significant implementation happening on this front. So I'll just share some of the things that have happened. So over the summer, we completed this series of recommendations, and in September, they were accepted by the Regional Executive Committee. And so in this last quarter of the year, we've actually seen very substantial progress forward. So, for example, Del Banowitz decided to start a composting business. The line, "Heaven's Best Compost, God's Best Food for Plants," is stenciled on the side of Del Banowitz's delivery truck. And it certainly conveys his philosophy that food production should be modeled after Mother Nature's perfected methods. Heaven's Best Compost history started in Iowa when Mr. Banowitz ran a successful landscaping and composting business for many years. After Katrina, Del and his wife Betty decided to spend the business off-season volunteering on the Gulf Coast. For 5 years, they spent the winter months on the coast procuring food donations, managing soup kitchens, and teaching composting and gardening at schools and helping establish a few community gardens. Eventually, they decided to retire and moved full-time to the coast, where they started a 1-acre garden where they grow a variety of produce that they sell at local farmers markets. And it's at the local farmers markets that the Plan for Opportunity team met the Banowitzes. And what started as a conversation around the produce that they sell at the market turned to composting. Del had brought along all the compost facility equipment, which was used occasionally to manage relatively small windrow of garden waste and a few loads of horse bedding. By connecting with other stakeholders and Mark Williams with the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality, Heaven's Best Compost became the second food waste composting pilot project in the state and gained access to more composting feedstocks. The facility is experimenting to find the right mix of composting, including shrimp processing waste, restaurant food, and hay from the county fairgrounds. And so we're really excited about the possibility of how much waste could potentially be processed from these different sources. And so what his goal is to produce the first organic compost in the state. And what we heard from the region's organic farmers is that they don't have a source for organic compost, and they're required to import it from out of state. So this brand new business would be filling a market need, reducing the transportation cost and other costs associated with compost, and provide the region's farmers with a reliable source of organic compost. Now, Zero Waste Solutions and Mark Dunning Industries has been contracted by Keesler Air Force Base to help them increasing their diversion. And when they started on the base, the diversion rate was 14% in 2010. By October of 2011, diversion had increased to 56%, above the original 40% waste diversion goal. This is the result of the federal mandate that I had mentioned earlier, but Doug is really motivated in keeping his employees well informed and capturing waste at the point of generation. And while Keesler already has achieved a high rate of diversion in a very short period of time, Doug sees that their goal is to increase waste diversion to 75% by the end of 2012, and they want to do that through a variety of measures. So they're already diverting the food waste out of the dining halls, but they see significant opportunities to do other things. So for example, they are in conversations with some of the local food banks and charities to find a workaround that would allow them to donate the food and have those charities come and pick up the food from the site and be able to take them. And so we're getting close to getting there on that one. As I mentioned, the naval base has begun food waste diversion, and so they are diverting 8 tons a month from their facility. And they expect this to increase significantly because the naval base is also responsible for coordinating recycling at the NASA Stennis Space Center, and they're currently in talks with the Stennis Space Center about expanding to food waste diversion at that site. And so Jerry Davis, the manager of the naval base, said if we add several buildings at Stennis, we could divert enough food scraps to provide the route density needed by an organic waste hauler and hopefully lower the transportation costs, making the overall cost of composting these materials much lower. And because of all these new opportunities with these major institutions coming on board, the waste hauler is considering expanding the organics diversion options in Mississippi. And so the hope is that ultimately by the end of the year that 1,300 tons of waste could be composted instead of sending them to a landfill. And so that would hopefully be equivalent to 240 cars off the road. So we know we've gotten at least the equivalent of 200, but they're hoping to get to 240 by the end of the year. And so that's a very significant accomplishment when you think about the air quality benefits and all of the efforts we have to try to get cars off the road. To get the equivalent benefit just through food waste diversion is very significant. So the next step is to increase the Mississippi Gulf Coast edible food donation. And diverting edible foods to feed the region's hungry is a real priority. So one of the key issues was really about how do we access those healthy foods, and when we had talked to different stakeholders, they said, you know, they just weren't aware that they could divert the food and had some liability concerns. So there's an education effort underway to help educate the region's retailers and others about the Mississippi laws and their ability to actually donate those foods. And the United Way has expressed a willingness to create a matchmaking website through their existing volunteer network to allow for retailers, institutions, and others to be able to matchmake those edible food donations. The Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality has agreed to head up the food waste task force, and they have already started meeting on a quarterly basis, and they're continuing to bring together new stakeholders. We were able to get a $500,000 donation of fruit and vegetable seeds, which are now being distributed to households across the region to start their own community and backyard gardens. And the hope of the Food Waste Task Force is that they'll be able to institute a Compost Mississippi program, which will help educate folks at home about the efforts they can undertake to implement composting at home. Now, one of the casinos on the coast got excited and is working to install a biodigester to process its food waste, and is working with a local farmer to explore installing a hydroponic garden on the roof of their casino to support the restaurant. Now, with the creation of the Food Scraps Regional Task Force, composting pilot projects, revision of statewide composting regulations, and the start of a new Compost Mississippi program to promote education on commercial and residential composting, we also believe that the Mississippi Gulf Coast will provide many examples and models on organic diversion that will be applicable to other regions. So when we started on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, we just weren't sure if we would get any traction on the food waste diversion front. And what we found was a true enthusiasm and commitment to increasing the sustainability of the coast. So these examples show how everyone from the smallest to the biggest consumer can be part of creating regional love around food waste diversion. So we all have great memories revolving around food, and if there's something that the Mississippi Gulf Coast exemplifies, it's that food is love. Lots of sweat, tears, and blood are shed by many people so we can have this love. So if you can leave with just one message, it's don't waste the love. So that wraps up our presentation, and we're going to be ready for questions, and if you'd like to post a question, we'll take those. We do have one more polling question that we'd like to ask you. So at the beginning, most of you weren't very familiar with food waste planning and what was involved, so we'd like to know, based on what you've heard today, do you anticipate that you may be able to integrate food waste planning as part of your planning efforts in the future? So we'll give everybody a chance to vote. Okay, I'm going to close the polls in about 2 seconds. Okay. So what we see is that 40% of you say yes, you can imagine integrating food waste planning as part of your planning effort, which is great because when we asked you the first polling question, only 9% of you are involved in food waste diversion planning at this point. So that's great that so many of you may be able to do this, and 43% of you are not sure. But we'd be happy to talk to you more about this topic, and so we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. So I will pull out the questions and we'll see what's come in. Okay, so Karen has asked about the casinos and the diversion process. So there are 12 casinos, well 11 casinos that are open, a 12th that's coming on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And so it's been a little bit difficult to get engaged with the casinos, but we were able to engage with one of them. And they actually have a committee that is focused on energy and sustainability initiatives that the casino could undertake that could help them save money as well as help support the environment. And so we talked to them about some of the possibilities, and they had many ideas on their own, and were actually very excited about the possibilities and are having conversations with others in the region as part of this task force to identify what might be the possibility. And so for them, they see it as a marketing opportunity to share with their folks exciting things about what's going on there, and they also see it as an opportunity to reduce their costs, and as well as an opportunity to support the environment. So Elizabeth is asking, to what extent is food waste planning happening in Central Ohio? So I will let Angel answer that question.
Hello, Elizabeth. Actually, in Ohio, we have been very lucky that it has been in the last 3-4 years been very active. 3 years ago in the state, we only had 3 composting facilities that were accepting food scraps commercially. So that means that anyone could just bring them over there. And we had 3 that were institutional, mainly universities. At this time, we have 22 that are accepting food scraps and 7 institutional ones. Also, we have 4 anaerobic digesters that are accepting food waste as part of the feedstock to produce renewable energy, and one of them is here in Columbus. And we are seeing a lot of interest. Initial challenge was transportation. That has pretty much the topic or the challenge that everyone is facing nationwide. But there has been a couple emerging smaller companies that are dedicating to themselves to just haul organic and provide consulting for smaller restaurants and other generators to get them set up. So we think that we know that it's going to continue increasing.
Great. So Heather wants to know, are there any model zoning regulations that relate to food waste planning? So how can we strike a balance between supporting land use and reducing food waste? Angel, I think you've done some work on this. Do you want to respond to that one?
Yes. There are not a lot of model regulations for that. That has been a challenge. And we recently, in the last few months, we have an intern help working, developing the model code for zoning that would include both community gardens, but also will give guidance on how to allow composting in these gardens and those other activities. And we had to also review our state regulations for composting to relax some of the requirements that were not intended to allow smaller scale facilities without requiring permits and licenses. Because currently a community garden will need one, and that's not what we were intending. Now this is kind of new for everyone, and right now the zoning issues are emerging. And the challenge is that solid waste regulations vary by state, and then the zoning regulations vary by jurisdiction. So there's a need to, there's a need for model language. Hopefully soon we will release, we need to do a couple changes to ours. Our regulatory review of the compost regulations has been delayed, so that's why we haven't issued our model language. But hopefully that will be helpful, and that would spur other ones to follow along and start to develop model code for their states.
Great. So one of the things that I'll just add is that as part of this project, one of the implementation outcomes is that we're working on developing some model legislation that we can provide to the local jurisdictions that would indicate the zoning that could be put in place. So for example, as part of our zoning evaluation and looking at the codes, we found that one jurisdiction had explicitly enabled backyard composting, but they specifically banned food waste. So it said that you could only use it for yard waste, but it could not be used for food waste. And so we saw that as really a missed opportunity, that why would you ban food waste from a residential backyard composting operation? So we've been looking at some of the zoning regulations that are already out there and looking at what are some common sense ways that we could think about this. The major concern that we got from some of the zoning administrators is they wanted to support composting operations, but they needed to understand where was the limit, where you would draw the line between what is residential backyard composting versus what would be commercial scale composting, and how would you need to draw that line and think about managing that in an effective way. Okay, so the next question is that from Brian. He said, we're facing big challenges with federal standards regarding schools and free reduced lunch meals. We're trying to eliminate we're trying to introduce milk dispensers and eliminate the cardboard, reducing the waste on milk. And also standards are not for choice in the meal. Kids are not eating all of what's taken. So what are some opportunities to potentially reduce food waste in the schools? So I think those are some great examples of trying to move to milk dispensers and encouraging meal choice so that students take what they actually will eat. Angel, have you heard about any efforts related to schools on reducing waste there?
Just some of the efforts, and I mentioned a little bit, and there are actually some studies that you can find done at university cafeterias. And one is the servings, the portions, also eliminating trays. That way the students will only carry what they can actually eat. Most likely, they're less likely just to add more food to it. But that is certainly easier at the university level, where it's pretty much the students serve themselves. That doesn't happen normally at elementary schools or middle schools. But still, kind of the what some have done, and actually including prisons have done, is just meal planning. They watch for what kind of food items are less likely to be eaten, and they just substitute it for something that is more people will prefer. That takes a little bit of planning from the chef, but it's possible. One comment that I have, and it's because I saw a study recently that a school said that they reduced the amount of waste, of the volume of waste, by changing from the milk from cartons to the pouches. That certainly eliminates the volume, but I personally don't think it's a good strategy because those pouches, there's nothing you can do with it. There's really not a way to recycle them. I mean, other than there's some places that we use them to make purses and things like that. While the cardboard that you use for milk, that's wax-coated cardboard, that could be included with all the other food waste and sent to a composting facility. So you have to weigh those two things. And usually another consideration is when you pay for waste disposal, you're mostly paying by weight, not by volume. So it really, reducing waste the volume might not make as much of a difference on the amount of waste or on your cost. So that's one thing. It depends what you have available in your area. Certainly the dispensers are a less waste producing option.
Okay, the next question is from Jim. He hears that beer brewery waste is a terrific compost material. Does the Lazy Magnolia Brewery do so? And if so, do you know their experience? Yet another reason to drink craft brewed beer. So we agree that, if you're going to indulge in beverages, it's good to know that they have a positive outcome that's associated with them. The Lazy Magnolia has been very conscious that every waste product that they've identified a place for it to go. So, for example, some of their product goes to a local bakery where they bake wonderful breads. Some of it goes to one type of farm, another goes to another type of farm, and actually the wastewater authority needs their wastewater because of all of the materials in it actually help eat the bacteria and mix with the other wastewater that's coming through, so it's actually positive. So Angel, I can't remember, do they have any waste product that is going to compost, or is it all being diverted for secondary use?
Not at the time we were there, because they were not producing enough. They were producing enough, but the local farmers have a demand for it. But certainly, it is a great material for composting. I wonder if now that they're expanding, if they will have a need for that, or there will still be enough need for using it as a feedstock for animals. There is a possibility.
Okay. So Kevin notes that their solid waste district has a compost site. They accept food from one prison, but nowhere else. So do we have any suggestions on how we could expand our operations? And would you have to provide pickup of food waste 7 days a week? And so that's, I'll let Angel answer this a little further. I'm sure he has some other insight. But what I would say is this was kind of the point of this food waste stakeholders group, is that we just started bringing some of the institutions and others together to see if there might be interest in diverting some of that food waste. And what we found is that there were lots of interested parties. So you could talk to hospitals, you could talk to military bases, particularly the military bases if you have any in your region, because they're required to do increased diversion. We got the Restaurant Association involved to help us network and find potential people that would be interested in having their food waste diverted. In terms of the pickup, if you've already got, I don't know how it's structured exactly, but it sounds like you've got somebody that's going out to the prison to pick up this food waste. For the hauler situation that is happening on the coast, they just come in 1 day a week and stop at these different places, or maybe it's twice a week. And so it's not a 7-day-a-week operation. It's during the week, during their regular pickup time, that they go through to these different sites one after another and collect all that food waste. So I think there are a number of different ways that the operation could be structured, and part of it would be scaling based on the local demand, but also the capacity. Angel, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's accurate. And so far, you will have to only do it daily if you were producing that much. But just because you have diverting the food waste and put it separately doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have more increased pickups of the waste. And we have to think that this waste will have been put anyway in another trash container and will have been picked up once a week. It's the same situation. Now you're just putting it in a different container. Now, granted, there depends on the food waste. You may have to do different things. If there's a lot of vegetables, you will release a lot of water, and that can certainly release a little bit more odors, because when you have it in the other food, in the other waste, something else might absorb that liquid. So if you use appropriate containers and you close them, that seems to be working well. Also, it will depend on the season of the year, and if you are in the northern states or the southern states. When it's the winter, you may be able to hold for 2 weeks if it's too cold, because the food is pretty much going to freeze and not going to decompose. But in the south, you're certainly going to have more frequent pickups. So probably twice a week will be required. On the other hand, your regular solid waste, your other ones, you may reduce it to once a month. So you can increase cost on one side, but reduce significantly on the other way.
Okay. So Elizabeth asks, what changes are needed in local food codes governing restaurants and institutions? So Angel, do you have some thoughts on food codes?
The main thing that we have heard is on what are the temperatures. For example, I mean, there's a reason to have holding temperatures for the food. It's a safety issue. But usually for food codes, you have what they call a tempting range, when the food is just right there to the limit or the temperature that needs to be kept. And I heard that sometimes the health department goes and check and say, well, it's just at the tempting range, you cannot donate it. You have to throw it away. And that might, in some situations, might be overkill. But it's a difficult situation, to argue. Because some people might be fine accepting that, others won't. And at the end of the day, no one wants to take the liability, so it might end up being thrown away.
Okay, great. So the next question is one that we heard from some local officials as well. So how are concerns about smells and pests like raccoons or rats addressed? So Angel, I'll let you take that one.
I love that question, because the answer is it should be the same as it is right now. We actually have this is going on in Minnesota, and we have a couple municipalities here in Ohio, smaller towns, where they allow residents to put their food waste with the regular yard waste in those craft bags, and they haven't had any problem with that. Of course, if you put your food waste inside the yard waste and you close the bag well enough, the same material will act as a buffer or biofilter and control some of the others, and most of the food waste will be absorbed and decomposed with the yard waste. Now, when you are at the commercial situation, and if you're only taking, like I say, food processing, especially with shrimp, doesn't matter where you put it, that is going to just smell. So in order to address that, you will have to use probably different containers, and you're going to have to probably change your pickup schedules. It depends on the season. But in general, odor is not as bad as it would be with regular trash.
Great. So the next question that we have is, what type of state-level legislation could help the food waste problem? Maybe one that a not-for-profit advocacy agency could work to get changed. This is from Dan. So I think it varies from state to state what the issues are. In Mississippi, the issue was centered around how a composting facility would be classified. And in Mississippi, it would be classified the same as a solid waste dump, which requires extensive permitting operations. So that, for example, was a regulatory barrier. Angel, maybe you can comment on Ohio law and state-level issues that may be helpful there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, one thing that we did was change the regulatory structure for those facilities that want to compost food waste. And locally, we had that since 2003. In what most states have, and we also actually have it, at some point when composting became an option, a lot of people kind of adapted the landfill regulations, and basically was mostly addressing yard waste, and no one had in mind that people would want to do food waste. So regulations did not keep the development. So one of the things that can be done, and we have done in Ohio, many other states have done, is have a different kind of regulatory levels and requirements depends on which materials you want to compost. Usually, and I think you will find this across all states, if you're only taking yard waste, basically it's a very basic permit by rule. It tells you, let us know where you are located, and these are the conditions that you need to operate. Once you start adding more materials, oversight increases. For us, if you want to take food waste, you do not need a permit, and by that I mean that you need to submit an application with engineering details, and we run public hearings. What we do is the registration. You let us know where you are. You prove to us that you meet certain setting criteria. You provide some plan view drawing of how your facility is arranged, or the layout. But then we have an operating license that the local health department issues, or we might issue. So basically that required that to get the license that you have a pre-inspection. So one of the inspectors go, make sure that the site is prepared and ready to take in waste, and then there's a mandatory quarterly inspection. And the cost for that can be as low as $300. And that you take up to 12 pounds a day, which is very significant, large amount. So a lot of our facilities are kind of the lower ranges, so it's very affordable, especially for someone that wants to start a business. And we can do all this process in about a month, comparing with a permit that could take up to 2 years.
So Joan wants to know,
and by the way, if you want to, actually our regulations. Huh?
Go ahead, Angel.
Sorry, Jennifer.
The next question that we have is about from Joan, and she wants to know whether the Department of Agriculture has encouraged using food waste or other compost in the growing of crops.
And other compost on where?
On crops?
Yes, and actually a lot of, well, specifically if you're a confined animal feeding operation or a CAFO that you require a permit, those permits require, part of it is that you have a plan for how you're going to handle any waste. And composting or anaerobic digestion is one of the methods that they can use. And if they're keeping it all on farm, using it themselves, that's a common practice. We do not regulate it as a solid waste. And that pretty much is in the old states. But there are certain, the Natural Resource Conservation Service might have, just like with any other fertilizer, require them to look into nutrient loading aspects. So it's kind of different regulations, but in terms of managing their own waste, makes it very easy.
Christina wants to know, regarding municipalities that are addressing food waste reduction, are cities beginning to build their own anaerobic digestion systems and other food composting facilities, or are most cities entering into public-private relationships with food waste enterprises? And what do you think the trend will be in the future?
At least here in Ohio, it has been public-private partnerships. And it all started as wastewater treatment plants that were actually using composting. They needed to rebuild after 20 years update the facility. So they entered into this agreement that they built the composting, the anaerobic digester, were taking care of the sewer sludge, but they were allowed to add some of the food waste in order to increase production of gas. Food waste is very rich in energy because it hasn't been digested there. So that's something that can really help and improve production. These four that we had right now operating in Ohio, they're owned by the same company. It was very similar. The one in Columbus, it's a partnership with the city and this local solid waste management district. The solid waste management district provided the land at a low lease rate so they can place the digester, the city agreed to send certain amount of the sewer sludge to the facility. This was also beneficial to the facility because this was material that was being incinerated and they needed to replace the incinerator, and this provided a lower cost alternative. They're adding some food waste, but most of the food waste is usually fats, oils, and greases and processing waste. There are different ways to do anaerobic digestion. There's what we call wet and dry systems. The wet ones, you need like a slush kind of material. So cardboard, you have to pre-process it a lot. So fat, oils, and greases are easy to add. The same thing as off-spec pet food, which is another thing that they're taking. Or something that is just vegetables or just meat are easier to add instead of a mix. And I know right now there are at least 12 other digesters being developed in the state. Some of them are with partial funds from AgStar, so they will be at agricultural facilities. One of them, a couple of them are in a agricultural location, but actually going to serve several farms, so it's not associated with a specific farm. It's more of a public private partnership with the local community. And as part of the Developing American Act, ARA funds, there were 10 digesters that were given some state of funds, I believe about $1 million each, to get them started. Lost, there's 4 of them will be in the Cleveland area alone. So there's some government investment, but certainly it's more public-private partnerships.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. We've run out of time, but you had lots of great questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. We have recorded today's session, and it will be available on the Utah APA website on Monday. I encourage you to sign up for future sessions, and I hope that you have learned something as part of today's session and see how food waste diversion could be beneficial in your own community. When you leave the session, you will be asked to fill out a quick evaluation. We do appreciate your feedback, so please complete that survey, and we look forward to seeing you in future APA webcast, these chapters and divisions and universities webcast series. Thanks so much, everyone.
Everyone.
Angel, I will follow up with you via email after today's session, okay?
Okay.
Thanks so much. All right, bye-bye.